Okay, so now we're in the first section of this chapter, and we're going to talk about JavaScript in the browser. Now, we've been preparing you for this for throughout this whole cohort, getting you to understand how JavaScript is so dynamic, how JavaScript is interpreted, how it works, and so it's now putting it all together with the DOM. We talked about the DOM. I introduced it to you early on. I planted the seed. Now it's growing, and now we're adding more to your understanding so that you are going to think like a web developer, think like a person that solves problems. If you're new to this channel and you would like to follow the curriculum, it's free. Just click the link in the description and you can follow along. Let's get into it. JavaScript and the browser. Taking JavaScript on the web. So far, we have created web pages with HTML and CSS. These pages have been static, meaning that the page appears the same each time it's loaded or loads. However, you may find that you want to create a web page that changes after it's been loaded. In order to create such a page, you would use JavaScript. Web pages that can change after loading in the browser are called dynamic. So these are two terms here, static and dynamic. Now, here, JavaScript is a dynamic programming language. When we get over to Java, you're going to realize Java is a static programming language. We're going to really dig deeper and build upon this to help you really understand this concept. This is useful to programmers and users alike because they can interact with an application without refreshing the page. Having to consistently refresh the page will be a poor experience for the user, and JavaScript helps programmers alleviate this burden. Here's an example. When you're on a social media page, you may like someone's post. When you do like their post, you may notice that several things happen. The counter of how many likes the post has received increased by one, and the like button may change color to indicate that you liked the post. This is an example of how JavaScript could be used to create an application that dynamically updates without the page having to be refreshed. We have been running all of our JavaScript code in Node.js. Now, it's ready to transition over to the browser. But now it's time to use JavaScript in the browser to make dynamic web pages. Node.js, or just Node, is a JavaScript interpreter. Understand, it's an interpreter with access to lots of different JavaScript libraries. Each browser has its own engine for running JavaScript. Okay, now this is something that you need to understand here. You may be on Chrome. Right here, I'm on Chrome. You may be on Firefox. Maybe you're using Edge. Each one of those browsers, they don't have a general standard. They have their own standards. So they have their own engines of how they run JavaScript. Some are closer than others. The top two that most developers use for testing and really implementing their concepts is going to be Mozilla, which is Firefox, or Chrome. And Chrome have multiple types of browsers, and so does Firefox. So understand what this means. This engine runs differently. So what that means, when you create a software or you create a web application, it may look different on each browser. It may take different type of pixels, how it arranges the pixels. So when you test your product or your web application, you have to test it on as many browsers as you can to make sure that it looks the same, as close as possible. This is definitely a challenge when you're using vanilla JavaScript. That's why later on we're going to introduce to you different frameworks and libraries that's going to make this easier. So I just want to make sure you understand this. JavaScript runs in the browser. It is called client-side JavaScript. Firefox using an engine called SpiderMonkey to run client-side JavaScript. Since each browser uses its engine, each browser may handle HTML, CSS, or JavaScript differently. That's why one size doesn't fit all when it comes down to making a web application. It is your job to make sure it's consistent as much as possible on each one of these browsers. This can lead to discrepancies between browsers. The website Can I Use is a great resource to check browser usability of any JavaScript, HTML, or CSS. So if I click on this and I go over and I check it out, this is what it looks like. You can come here and type in whatever feature that you're using, and it's going to let you know what you can use. And so let's call animation. I type that in, hit enter, and it right here, this tells me all the different browsers. You see how many browsers that's out there? Most of these you don't know anything about, but if you look at them, it'll tell you in green which ones can use animation. Great tool, great resource. Now the script tag, we're familiar with the script tag from introducing you to HTML, and see how important it is, how it links everything together. When we get into React, we're going to deal with JSX. So this is going to be a little bit different, but you need to understand the rules and the principles. In the HTML chapter, we learned that an HTML page is made up of elements that are written as tags. Those elements have different purposes. The script element purpose is to include JavaScript into the web page. A script tag can contain JavaScript code inside of it or reference an external JavaScript file. So again, in HTML, that's your entry point into your web application. It's going to be your HTML page, and everything is going to be stored or shown from that page. So whatever logic, and that's what we normally call JavaScript. This back in the day, we used to call it logic. Logic.js would be our file, and you put all your different logic in there. But in order for it to be seen on the actual browser, you have to import it through a script tag. JavaScript console. Using the developer tools, you can access a JavaScript console. There you can mess around with fun JavaScript statements, or you can use it to see the outputs of the client-side JavaScript you have written. So we have JavaScript inline. This is when you do it inline. Notice here that it has an opening and closing script tag. It's not importing anything. You're doing this directly inside of the head, or you could do it in the body. The difference between this is load time, because remember, JavaScript it's interpreted. It goes from line by line. It starts with the head and it reads all of this stuff. So if it goes through the head first, then this JavaScript is going to load first. But if you don't want that to happen, like if you're fetching a lot of data, you're going to want the content to load first, and then when the data is ready, then it loads, so it doesn't slow down or block anything on your page. Because if it loads first and it has a lot of data in it that it got to parse through, then the information, the content, it has to wait until this is done in order for it to present the content. That's not good user experience. But we'll dig deeper into that when we start fetching data. External JavaScript. Some programmers have large amounts of JavaScript to add to an HTML document. Using external JavaScript file, you can help in these cases. You can still use the script tag to include the JavaScript file within the HTML document. In this case, you'll need to use the source attribute, which will be considered like an importer for the path to the JavaScript file. Path, we talked about paths. Now this is the syntax. It has to go inside of this opening script tag. It doesn't go in between. Remember, this will be anything in between an opening and closing script tag is going to be considered the child. And that's something we'll deal with later on when we get into React. But again, you notice we put it in the head, but then that means there's not a lot here in this JavaScript source script. But if there is a lot of information in it, you have to put it at the bottom of the body, before the closing tag of the body. And you can have multiple script tags. You don't have to have one, because you can have multiple sources, and we'll explain that later. Then the JavaScript file myjs.js might look something like this. So you can console log. Console log only works with JavaScript. It won't work with HTML by itself. It has to be in a JavaScript format file, or a script tag, or an external file in order to use console.log. You can use the script tag to reference JavaScript files hosted on external servers. Some of these JavaScript files will be files that you have not written yourself, but you will want to include in your application. That's why I was talking about fetching data. All right, check your understanding. We made it to the end of this section. A little bit more information that I introduced to you in this particular section. Take the time to get familiar with it, and let's start writing some code all together. You're at the point now to where you can build a project from beginning and go all the way through. You don't have to use our exercise files. It's great to use them, but to get more familiar with it and confidence in programming, writing code, and solving problems, create the project from scratch. Okay, so now again, we made it to the end of this section. That's the end of this video. Remember, the more you do, the more you improve. See you in the next.